Today we're covering material in preparation for section 4.1. We're going to talk a little bit more about factoring as more practice. Then we're going to talk about factoring by grouping, so talking about factoring cubics. So, starting off, when we look at something like x squared plus 5x plus 6, we want to think about things that multiply to 6 and add to 5. So this is where we always set up our two sets of parentheses first. Right, x in the first component. Now we think about things that multiply to 6. So things like 2 and 3 or 1 and 6. And I have to think about if I have a 2 and a 3, can I get those to add to 5? Well, certainly 2 and 3 add to 5. So those are the two we're going to go with. Then we look at our signs. So we know we have a plus 6 here, which means we must have matching signs. And so since our plus 5 is also positive, we know our matching signs are both positive. And there we have factored that one. Now looking at the next set, we again write our parentheses. This time we have a 2 in the front, so we must have a 2x and an x that multiply to 2x squared. Now I'm thinking about things that multiply to 15. So that's 1 and 15, that's 3 and 5. And then I think, okay, well, I need these numbers to combine with the 2. Something's going to multiply with the 2, and it's then going to add to the negative 7. So I'm going to think 1 and 15 are probably not the right numbers, but that 3 and 5 maybe are. So if we have something like 3 and 5 or 5 and 3, we think about, okay, in foiling, how would I make up this inner number in here? Well, to make up that inner number in foiling, here we have our FOIL. It comes from the outer and the inners being multiplied together. So essentially, these inner numbers get multiplied together, and these outer numbers get multiplied together. So if my inner number is a 3, then I have a 3 times x. And if my outer numbers are a 2 and a 5, I'm looking at a 10x. So I think to myself, can I combine the 3x and the 10x to make a 7x? I think so. But let's see what happens if we had it the other way around. Let's say we had a 5 here and a 3 here. Then we'd be looking at a 5x and a 6x. And I don't know how to use 5x and 6x to add together to a 7x. So let's go back to the other one. 3 and 5. Well, then I'd have a 3x and a 10x. And 10x minus 3x will give me the 7x in the middle. Okay, so now we just have to look at our signs. I'm happy with the 3 and the 5. I need them to have opposite signs so that they multiply to a negative 15. So I need a negative overall, so I'm going to put the negative in front of the larger of the two and put the positive elsewhere. Now we can always FOIL just to check our work. We get 2x squared plus 3x minus 10x and minus 15, which does in fact give us the 2x squared minus 7x minus 15, that we were looking for. So that's awesome. That factoring is correct. Okay, now we want to look at our third case. This is actually a special case that we call square minus a square. And that tells us when this second factor is a square that it's always going to be of the form x minus something, x plus something. And that thing is going to be the square root of our second value. So for us, that's 4 and 4. And that's just always the rule with square minus a square. You can also think about it as, well, this is x squared plus 0x minus 16. So I need two numbers, after I set it up, two numbers that multiply to 16 that add to 0. Well, that's going to be a minus 4 and a plus 4. Right, and so either factoring method will work. I like thinking about the square minus a square rule in here that helps us factor it out pretty quickly. It's up to you, though. Now we're going to look at factoring trinomials, cubic functions. Cubics, because there's an x to the third here. Cubic. So To factor a cubic, and these are all so far in this course, we're only going to do factoring by grouping for this week. And that always going to come down to this method. Essentially, we're going to try to factor something out of this term and the same thing out of this half. And then we'll actually be able to factor out a kind of a term overall. So you're going to see how that works. What I want you to do is always make sure that our exponents are in descending order. So here we have the x cubed term, then the x squared term, then the x, then there's the no x term. From the first term, two terms, you're going to factor out an x squared. So essentially x cubed is going to become x because I factor out an x squared. And the 4x squared is going to become a 4 because again, I factored out the x squared. And we do nothing so far with the other two terms. Now, wouldn't it be nice if I could get an x plus 4 to appear in this half as well, because then I could factor it to the very front. And so what I'm going to do to make that happen is factor out whatever the coefficient is of the next term, this minus 9. If I do that, I'm looking at x squared, x plus 4, minus 9 parentheses. Now I'm going to factor that minus 9 out of my right-hand side. And I get x, and now I think about minus 36 divided by minus 9, which is a plus 4. Because these are factor by grouping problems, this grouping method will always have the same factor in both terms. Because now I can factor an x plus 4 to the front, and I'm left with my x squared term and my minus 9 term. So it looks like this. Now all of a sudden I have my linear term pulled out, and I just have an x squared term to deal with. So I can just factor that one more time using my square minus the square rule, and I have x minus 3 and x plus 3. And now I'm fully factored. So it's important to try to remember that this is the number you're trying to factor out of the right-hand side. It usually makes things easier. So let's try this again. I'm going to take my x squared out of the first two terms, and I have x minus 2, right? Because I take the x squared out of the first term, I'm left with x. I take the minus 2, I take the x squared out of the second term, and I'm left with the minus 2. Now I'm going to take a minus 25 out of the second set of terms, just because it's the coefficient in front of the x. And I'm left with an x, and then I do 50 divided by the negative 25, I get a minus 2. Well, now you can see my x minus 2 appeared twice, and so I just pull that to the front, and I'm left with an x squared and a minus 25. Now I factor one more time, and I get x minus 2, and I use my square minus the square rule, x minus 5, x plus 5. All right, and that is now fully factored. All terms are split up. So this is what I want you guys to practice. There's a whole worksheet here, again, with more factoring. It's kind of challenging to get used to the whole factor by grouping on the x cubed, but that is part of your homework, so please give it a try. And as always, reach out if you have any questions.